الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وآله وأصحابه وأزواجه ذريته أجمعين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي، ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر جندك وحزبك في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها، وانصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عن عبادك في غزة وفي لبنان وفي الضفة وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. نفس كربنا وكربهم وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين. وصل وسلم على سيدنا ومولانا وحبيبنا وشفينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته الراحمين. Fluid space. Newton maintained that space has its own nature. By which I understand that its nature is not determined by relations alone, without dependence on anything else. So in Cartesian term, that would be a substance as well, self-sustaining. The three-dimensionality, somehow dimensionality of space is an intrinsic. Three-dimensionality of space is intrinsic, essential property of space. Three-dimensional obviously means and property. Sorry. And by essential property, is the property which cannot be separated from a thing without that thing losing its identity. And general method to arrive at an essential property of a thing is an abstraction. For example, my hair, they are not my essential property because I go to a barber and cuts my hair, he shortens them, neatens them. Obviously, I'm not saying that this is an easy matter, but in a simplistic term, it doesn't change who I am. It's very hard to really say what is the essence of human beings. You have to sort of in your mind abstract everything which you can abstract without making that thing something else, or that thing not remaining the thing it is. So in a sense, it's an abstract concept, but a useful concept. And it's not that an easy thing to actually find what is an essential property of something. So Newton maintained that the space has its own nature without dependence on anything else. The three-dimensionality of space is an intrinsic essential property of space. So anything space in this sense must have these three things. Mathematicians can describe space as having other dimensions, but these are not our space. If one part of space is different from another part, this is not because of differences in the space itself, but because of the things that occupy space. So that's the thing. This is not because of the difference in space itself, but because, let's go back a bit. If one part of a space is different from another part, this is not because of difference in space, but so this complicates things. In the last session, we talked about the difference between space and place. So space has its own intrinsic nature for Newton. That means that the things which are in space are different from and separate from the space. They don't define the space, according to Newton. But once things occupy space, that differentiate one space from the other parts of space, which don't have those things or don't have anything. So for Newton, for example, from this we can see that for Newton, empty spaces and empty spaces possible, because it has its own nature. It is independent from things which occupy it. So this is not the case for someone who believes that space is relational, for it. Doesn't have its intrinsic nature. It's defined by the things. So it's a relation between things or among things. So space is absolute in the sense that it is independent of the things, and space can be empty for Newton. And from a scientific viewpoint, from a viewpoint of a physicist, I mean, people say that relativity basically discredited or prove the Newtonian conception of space to be wrong or false or outdated. But that's not necessarily true. And if you want to see layman from a from a layman's point of view, not from a layman's point of view, but something which is accessible to a layman, but written by a physicist. The best I have read is Brian Greene's explanation of the possibility of a Newtonian absolute space and how a space can be empty. In his book, I think, The Fabric of Universe, I think. What I want to say is it's not true that relativity have proven Newtonian conception of space to be false or anything like that. There are still physicists who believe or might believe in a Newtonian space, at least at certain level of explanation or yeah. So space, if one part of space is different from another part, this is not because of differences in space itself, but because of the things that occupy space. Absolute space is also separate from time. That's another thing which differentiates Newtonian concept from Einstein's conception of space. In contrast to absolute space, relative space depends for its character upon nature of things it relates. It would vanish were there no spatially related entities. So, for example, so from this conception, there's no such thing as empty space, for example. So it would vanish were there no spatially related entities, and in principle it is subject to change. Okay, so let's finish on this quotation from Newton's mathematical principles of natural philosophy. Absolute space in its own nature, without relation to anything external, remains always similar and unmovable. And that's why Newton's laws of motions, for example, is the absolute reference for them. Okay. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى وسلم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم آمين. اللهم انصر أولياءك وجندك وابنانا وفي غزة وفي الضفة وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها وانصرهم على عدوك صلى وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.